When I asked permission to share this with you, his dad said, absolutely. He said they want to do their part to share his story. They want to help remove stigmas and end judgment and open everyone's eyes to the struggles of the mentally ill and addicted. He said, if whatever you share saves one life, it's worth it. We don't want anyone to have to go through what we're going through. And I want to tell you that since that funeral, I've received 3 apologies. Yeah, I said apologies. The first came from the funeral home staff member immediately after the service. After the funeral, after I'd gotten back to the parsonage, I received a call from the young man's dad. The next morning, I received a phone call from the funeral home owner asking me if I'd still do funerals for them. And they all apologized for the friend's language and behavior that evening. And in all 3 conversations, I found myself struggling with what to say. Did I really need an apology? Did the friend's behavior really offend me? If I accepted any apology, was I then acquiescing to a judgmental attitude? That because I'm a clergy person, his friends have to show their love and support in ways that I deem appropriate? What's right? I think I would have struggled anyway, but I was definitely thinking about today. And I have to tell you that I'm deeply affected by this video that we're about to see. And I want you to listen and see if you can understand why.
There's such a key difference between recognizing our sin, recognizing our need for forgiveness and redemption, and thinking that because we are sinners, because we are broken and live in a fallen world, that we're somehow unlovable, that we're not loved by God, that we have to change to be loved by God. And I don't think the church ever intends for people to feel that they're not loved by God, but unfortunately it happens. It happens a lot. And it's not limited to LGBT people, but it is something that a lot of LGBT people face. That
Wait a minute. You're making the assumption that everybody's created in God's image?
Well, everyone is created in God's image, but I think, you know, we can have a conversation in the church about sexual morality. We can have a conversation about marriage. How do we define marriage? We can have a conversation about you know, any of these things. But what's happened way too often is that in the midst of the debates that we have about issues, we've become fixated on the issues and on the debates and forgotten to care for the people. And somehow we've gotten confused and convinced ourselves that we're caring for people by debating with them, by telling them what God thinks. And
we should,
you know,
love the sinner but hate the sin.
Well,
Is that
yeah.
what you're saying?
Well, you know, Tony Campolo says that Jesus didn't say love the sinner, hate the sin. Jesus said love the sinner and hate your own sin. And then when you're done dealing with your own sin, then you can, you know, worry about your brother or sister's sin. And there's something to that. The idea that you know, Jesus tells us that we need to deal with the planks in our own eyes before we deal with the speck in our brother or sister's eye. And there is a place for accountability in the church. But when I first came out in my church and started talking about the fact that I was gay and that I was trying to figure out what this meant and what did God want me to do, all too often people who intended to be offering loving words of holding me accountable ended up making me feel judged and misunderstood. They didn't listen to my story. They didn't listen to what I was going through. Instead, they thought they already knew, and so they came in ready to preach the right verses at me and tell me what God thought. And as I say, there's room for accountability, but that's not accountability. What that is that's judgment. That's assumption about who I am, about what I want, about what I'm going through, and it's a lack of love. It's interesting that the Pharisees were quick to tell people, oh.
Justin, cut. See the Pharisees. It's a Pharisee. Hold on. They're going to shut this filming down.
It's interesting. The Pharisees were quick to tell people what the rules were. The Pharisees were quick to say, here's where you're wrong, here's what you should be doing, and put those burdens on people. Jesus, by contrast, was quick to find out what people's needs were and to take care of their needs, to feed them, to love them, to let them know that God loved them. Jesus' closest friends were the outcasts and the sinners and the folks who, they were doing everything wrong, and yet Jesus wanted to spend time with them. And Jesus was heavily critical of the Pharisees, who in all their attempts at righteousness, and I think they were trying to be righteous, were missing grace. They were missing the point of grace, and they were focused on following the rules. Well, I think when we talk about grace, it's not, I don't mean to talk about a cheap grace to suggest that it doesn't matter what we do. I think it does matter what we do. But I think that the message of the Scriptures is that even when we do the wrong thing, and we all do, that God loves us, that there's forgiveness, that there's mercy, and that each of us is responsible to watch our own hearts, to make sure that we're doing the right thing, but to be forgiving and merciful and gracious towards others, to give them the benefit of the doubt, to understand when they do the wrong thing. The easy thing is to do the opposite, to give ourselves the benefit of the doubt and to condemn and criticize others when they do the wrong thing. But that's the Christian message. Is that God loves us so much that God forgives us over and over and over and over when we sin. And so we, in turn, have to show grace and mercy and forgiveness to others. Whether they're sinning against us or sinning against God, we need to love them. We need to seek to understand them and be their friends and neighbors the way that Jesus did.
How long will that take? Like 5 to 20 minutes? Is that going to be like a weekend program or something like that?
Well, that's a lifelong journey to learn how to show grace like Christ. I mean, if we were capable of showing the kind of grace that God's shown to us, we probably wouldn't need Christ to begin with. But I think that the greatest journey we have as Christians is not just to try to do all the right things, although we should try to do the right things, but to learn how to be gracious, to learn how to show to others the love that God has shown to us. It's in many ways the hardest thing to do. It's easy to insist that people follow the rules. The Pharisees were able to do that. It is hard to show them grace when they don't follow the rules. And unfortunately, the church in our culture has gotten a reputation for preaching rules at people and not showing them love. And I would rather that we had a reputation for being the most loving people rather than the most rule-abiding people. Although, frankly, I don't even think that we have a reputation for being the most rule-abiding people. I think we have a reputation for being the most rule-preaching people. And that's where the idea comes from that Christians are hypocrites and bigots and all of these things that are the opposite of who Jesus was. So, yeah, I think, you know.
So you're saying you're not behaving properly, you just want people to be listening and be forgiving, because being a gay and a Christian is behaving improperly, but you just need people to show you grace. Is that what you're saying?
Well, no. When, you know, I spend my life talking about faith and sexuality in a Christian context. And I find that I often have to be very intentional about separating out, on the one hand, questions about what do we believe is right as far as sex and marriage and all of that goes. And on the other hand, how do we believe we ought to treat the people who we think have gotten it wrong? And it's true going both ways. It's true whether you are a Christian who believes marriage is between a man and a woman, and you're trying to figure out how to respond to the person who believes that two people of the same sex can be married, or whether you're the person who believes that God blesses same-sex marriage, and you're trying to figure out how to respond to the person who doesn't, and who you think is wrong in that. We have to be able to have the conversation about what do we believe is right. And that's a conversation that is ongoing in the church. There's still a lot of disagreement about it. And
so once you figure that out, then you could serve together and share the Eucharist together and teach together, correct? Well,
I think whether you're certain where you stand on that, or whether you're still figuring out where you stand, the most important question is how we show grace to one another. And it grieves me that we're spending so much energy arguing about who's right that we're spending comparatively little time and energy thinking about and talking about how we can love each other in the midst of it. And again, that's not to say that the question of who's right isn't important. It is. But, you know, Paul says, you know, without love, I'm a clanging gong, a cymbal, you know, and I think that's how the church comes across, is if we're arguing about who's right and we're not showing love to one another, then it's ultimately meaningless. And I think a lot of times we think that just telling people that they're wrong is what it takes to be loving. And people tell me this all the time. They say, well, I am being loving because I'm telling you that you're wrong.
I love you so much, I don't want you to go to hell.
Right.
I'm telling you.
I love you so much, I don't want you to go to hell. I love you so much, I don't want you to be out of God's grace. I love you so much that I need to tell you the truth. It is true that sometimes when we love people, we have to tell them things they don't want to hear. But I think it's very easy to convince ourselves that arguing with people, telling them where we think they're wrong, is all it takes to be loving. And the reality is, love is hard. Telling you my opinion on why you're wrong is easy. The world does that. The world is quick to tell you why they think you're wrong.